Canon just dropped a $650 mirrorless camera, and it might just be the best budget YouTube camera that we've seen in a while. It's packed with a bunch of pro level features such as vertical shooting, log video, all at a budget friendly price.
You gotta just press record.
Welcome back to Think Media, Nate here. Now, Canon flew me out as well as a bunch of other creators to Hawaii to test out this new Canon R50V, as well as the new PowerShot V1, which I've actually covered in another video. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to check that out. But this video is going to specifically cover the Canon R50V and whether or not it's going to replace the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II as the best budget camera for creators. First, let's take a look at the design and the build quality of the new Canon R50V. Now, this camera is a mirrorless camera, which means you can swap out lenses for different looks. The lens paired with this camera that will come with the kit is a new 14 to 30 millimeter lens, which is pretty sweet if you are just looking for a vlogging lens to pair with this camera. But we'll talk about this lens a little bit later on in the video. But taking a look at the camera itself, my first impression with picking up this camera was just how lightweight it truly was. It's also really compact as well, which is going to be perfect if you do a lot of travel or handheld shooting. Now, this camera is specifically designed for video in mind, so you're not going to get things like an EVF, and that's going to help keep the weight and the size down, as well as the price point. But you can definitely see how this camera is more designed for video thanks to all of its buttons on this camera. There is a record button up front. There is a dedicated live stream button. So if you want to use your camera for Zoom calls or for live streaming, this is also a great option. There's also a new color button, which when you select that, you can access your normal color picture profiles, as well as these new color filters, and also a custom picture style, which you can access things like C-Log if you want to shoot log video. Turning our attention to the side of the R50V is a 1/4-20 mount on the side of the camera. This is great if you plan to mount your camera vertically to a tripod, so it allows you to shoot vertical content such as shorts or Instagram reels or even live stream vertically. We could also use this to attach different accessories to your camera, and I'll be interested to see what products come out that allows you to use that 1/4-20. On top of the camera is this new control dial, and as you rotate it, you'll notice that all these icons are specifically designed for video. You have a new slow and fast mode, which allows you to quickly go into shooting slow motion content, or you can also do fast motion such as time lapse. There's also a bunch of different custom modes, so you could really customize your camera to fit your needs. Moving on to the image quality of the R50V, let's talk about the sensor, which is an APS-C size 24 megapixel sensor, which is a nice and large sensor, which is going to help with those low light shots, as well as give you a nice shallow depth of field for those blurry backgrounds. In terms of the video quality, this camera is capable of shooting 4K video. It's actually oversampled from the 6K sensor, so we're going to have the benefit of having a slightly sharper and more detailed image. This camera is also capable of shooting 60 frames per second in 4K, although there is a crop of 1.56x in this mode. This is a pretty significant crop, and that means you're either going to have to reframe your shot or kind of walk back just to get the right framing. Colors coming from this camera also look great. I mainly shot in the auto picture profile just to see what the camera would give for a nice neutral look, but there are a bunch of different picture profiles and color filters to choose from. I tested out a few of these color filters in this camera as well, and these are great if you are looking for a more cinematic image, but you don't really have the color grading skills. However, if you plan on color grading your videos, you'll be happy to know that this camera is capable of shooting log video at 10-bit video quality. And Canon Log 3 just gives you a ton of dynamic range to work with when you are color grading. I was able to really push my image and get really these stylized looks from this camera. And this is perfect if you are looking to really utilize your camera to the maximum. But not only that, there are a handful of video features and exposure tools that help you get more cinematic looking footage. I'll run through some of these pretty quickly, but there is false color, which is a great exposure tool. There are cinematic aspect ratios, which you can burn into your video. There's also the ability to burn inlets into your video file. So for example, if you've already made a nice color graded LUT that you like all your footage to be, well, you can actually upload that file into your camera and it's going to apply that cinematic look to all your footage. So those are some seriously impressive video features that this camera has to offer. Next, let's take a look at the stabilization of this camera. Now, this camera does not have in-body image stabilization, which may be disappointing for some, but for the price point, it is understandable that it does not have it. However, to get by this camera does have electronic image stabilization. However, again, this is going to crop into your footage. Because this camera does not have image stabilization, you'll notice that in some of my vlogging shots or where I'm handheld, the image is going to be quite a bit shaky, and that is potentially a downside if you plan to use it for vlogging. So for those needing stable footage, you will want to pair this camera with an image stabilized lens. And luckily, this new kit lens does have image stabilization. This lens has a focal length range of 14 to 30 millimeters, so this is going to give you a decently wide angle. It's not as wide as the PowerShot V1, so that is something to consider. But one cool thing about this lens is it is a power zoom, so you can adjust the focal length very smoothly and evenly just by rotating the zoom ring. And at first I didn't know whether I liked this feature or not, because I'm used to just having a manual zoom lens. And I talked to some of the other creators, but we kind of all decided that this is a cool feature that we would just have to get used to, because one benefit of having a power zoom is you are able to hold the camera nice and steady as you adjust the focal length. So that is something that you would want to consider on how you'd want to use your camera. Now I do want to mention the aperture range of this lens because it starts at an f4 and goes down to 6.3. This means this lens does not let in a lot of light, and this can be a major downside if you plan on doing low light video. However, that is a benefit of a mirrorless camera, is the ability to swap it out for a different lens that is faster and lets in more light. Now quickly want to mention the autofocus performance of this camera, and particularly this lens as I tested it. And honestly, I was really impressed with the autofocus performance. It was really clear and easy just to select which objects you want in focus and where. Anytime that I was in front of the camera, I knew I was going to be in focus. And speaking of low light, I wasn't able to test this very much during my trip in Hawaii because I had limited times with this camera and the PowerShot V1. But I will mention that because of the kit lens being so dark, did really limit the low light potential. So if you do want better low light performance, I would recommend picking up a faster lens, and particularly the Sigma lenses, because they have faster aperture values. So particularly the Sigma 16 1.4 or even the Sigma 18 to 50 f2.8. Both of those lenses are going to let in more light, and that is going to be also great for low light and getting you a more shallow depth of field. But once I get this camera in my hands, I plan on doing more low light tests, and I'll be sure to update you with my thoughts. One thing I do want to mention about the R50V is the concern of overheating. Now, when I was talking to the Canon guys, they basically said that there was no thermal performance issues on this camera, which gets me pretty excited about the possibilities of using this as a professional video camera for content creation or for vlogging. And during the few days of testing this out in Hawaii, in the bright sun, shooting all day, I never had once this camera overheat on me. I would love to do more tests and really stress test it to see just how well it would actually perform, especially for recording for hours at a time. But things are looking pretty good when it comes to the overheating not being an issue. Earlier in this video, I mentioned comparing the R50V to the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II. And I do think that both of these cameras are quite similar in terms of its video features. However, the ZV-E10 Mark II costs $1,000 or just under it. And this new R50V costs $650. So you get a much better price to performance ratio on the new R50V. But let me know if you would be interested in a side-by-side comparison between the Sony and the Canon R50V. Let me know in the comments down below and I might just make a video about it. All right, so let's talk about a few downsides of this Canon R50V. Because this is a cheaper camera, there are going to be some limitations. Number one is the battery life. This uses a relatively small battery, and for all the different video features you get in this camera, you are going to be running through your battery more frequently. On paper, you should expect a battery life of up to 2 hours. So that is something to keep in mind if you are planning to shoot throughout the day. You might need to pack a few batteries just in case. Next up is the 4K 6D crop. Now I mentioned this in the Canon PowerShot V1 video that I did, but having that crop kind of takes me out of the creative flow when I'm filming, because then I have to suddenly reframe and zoom out just to get the shot I want. And I would really love to see a future version of this camera have 4K 60 no crop. Now third, because of the lack of IBIS on this camera, I do think it limits the ability to use this as a vlogging camera. In fact, I lean towards the PowerShot V1 because it had a much better stable image and it was a wider focal length. And that's something to consider if you are planning to primarily just be a vlogger or travel. You might need to have that extra stabilization. Now, I totally get why they don't have IBIS in such a cheap camera. Again, this is $650, which is really affordable for a mirrorless camera with all of these video capabilities. And honestly, the lack of IBIS may not be an issue for some. In fact, I have a ZV-E10 Mark II that I mainly use in the studio on a tripod, on a rig, so I'm not really ever needing to utilize IBIS. And if you plan on using this camera in your studio on a tripod, then honestly, that issue may not be a concern for you. So let's talk about who should buy the Canon R50V. If you are someone who does a lot of live stream, a lot of studio content where you are just wanting to do talking head video, I think this is a fantastic option. Maybe you're looking for your first mirrorless camera and starting to explore how to color grade your videos. This is also a great option. I'd also say to someone who is considering the Sony ZV-10 or the Mark II that they should probably consider the R50V and where it would fit in their workflow. And one reason why you may not want to pick up the Canon R50V is if you are a vlogger, I would say that the PowerShot V1 just has better capabilities in terms of vlogging. It's smaller, you have a built-in lens that looks great wide angle. If you want to learn more about the PowerShot V1, you can check out my full video right here.